Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose, as long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. This is your host, Sean. On this episode, we've got chinks in the rebuilt bullpen armor for the Cubs. We've got the Bears falling flat on their face in the first preseason game, and the Bulls making a possible big splash all-star player trade. All this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? It means you get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable pricing. Just 90 minutes from the city limits, fun for the whole family, and the preseason set to start on October 7th at the BMO Harris Bank Center against the Chicago Wolves with a 7 p.m. puck drop. For tickets, details, and more, check out icehogs.com. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. So I'm going to start this episode off with a background if you are not a current listener or you've just forgotten or you've never heard this before. We're by the fans for the fans show. So what does that mean to you? It means if you don't like what I'm saying, you can always write to the show via Twitter at Swerski Sports, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com, YouTube.com/Swerski Sports, whatever, and get us a message, and we will discuss your point on the air. If you want to come on the air and say your point or say why you think I'm an idiot, perfectly fine. Case in point, I had on the last episode somebody commented on YouTube that I was an effing idiot and that they were unsubscribing because I was so stupid. And part of me just wanted to lambaste them. One, because, well, that's your point. That's your prerogative. But first of all, you didn't unsubscribe. You're still subscribed. You'll probably listen to the next show. Thank you for listening. Two is you didn't say why you think I was an idiot. You didn't give me any sort of point of view. If there was something you disagree with, by all means, use logic and reason and statistics and etc. to mount your argument of why you think I'm wrong. Or at least let me know what you think I'm wrong about. Maybe you're an angry Cardinals fan that we broke Matt Holliday's finger or thumb, and you're mad about us talking about the Cubs. I don't know. Maybe you just woke up on the wrong side of the morning, or the wrong side of the bed this morning. I don't know, but whatever. I'm at least talking about it. So if you disagree with what I have to say, just tell me what you're disagreeing about and rationally discuss it. I have somebody that I regularly discuss things with on Twitter, private messages, and he disagrees with some of the things I have to say, and it's a calm and rational discussion. We say our points of view, and it's a fun exchange. I like discussing sports. So if you think I'm wrong, it's a possibility. It's always a possibility. Everybody's wrong at one point or another. Some more than others. But if you have your point of view, express it. But try to express it in a PG or G-rated way. Anyways, we're by the fans for the fans show. Unlike many of the major sports shows on the radio and on TV, we don't hate our fans. I'm a fan. I'm not a journalist. I'm not anything like that. I'm just a guy who loves sports and has been watching for a long time, and I have the microphone to do this. So I'm no different than you, except that I'm actually just recording what I'm able to say. But with that said, feel free to reach out and comment or whatever it is, and we will talk about it on the air. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about the Cubs first. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Chicago Bulls, not too much. And then we'll wrap up by talking about the Chicago Bears. So if you're only interested in one of those topics, you know the order, so you can fast forward through. Cubbies. Where to start? I know this story has died down a lot since the last episode, but I want to talk about the Tommy La Stella situation a little bit. If you're not familiar with the situation, is in baseball, younger players that come up from the minors, they have a certain number of options. That means they can be sent down from the major league roster back down to the minors without exposing them to other teams' waiver wires where other teams can lay claim to them. So when the Cubs had a rash of injuries and they got some players back and they made trades, etc., is that created a little bit of major league roster shuffling that needed to go on, because you can only have a certain number of players depending on what date of the season you're in. So you can only have X number of players, and if you have more than that on the roster, in order to bring somebody onto the team, you're going to have to send somebody down, cut somebody, or trade somebody. The obvious choice was to bring Chris Coughlin down because he's not playing well. You've got other players that can fill his role, etc., etc. But the problem is Coughlin doesn't have any more options left. So you expose him to other teams taking him and losing him forever. And he's not a great player, but if you're going to lose him, why if you don't have to? So instead, Tommy La Stella has an option left. So they can send him down with no repercussions, don't have to worry about it. And on September 1st, when the rosters expand, you could bring him back up. And so you're only really missing like 2.5, 3 weeks of major league time, and you spend that time down in the minors. And Tommy La Stella decided that rather than showing up and going down to AAA Iowa, he just went home to his family in New Jersey. And he was keeping open lines of communication with Jed Theo and Joe Madden, but he's still refusing to make his way to the AAA assignment. Now, at first I made the snap judgment of, what an idiot, blah, blah, blah. But I've listened to a few teammates, as well as Jed Hoyer and Joe Madden speak about the situation. And it just seems a lot more complicated, that there might be something going on that we don't know about. And they're shielding him from as much of the backlash as possible. His teammates support him, and the organization is seemingly supporting him. So then maybe what I was thinking was a little skewed on the situation. But I thought about it a little more after that, and honestly, I think what happened was that Tommy La Stella didn't want to go down, understandably, didn't want to go to an organization that wasn't the one he was on and wanted to be part of. He's made it a point that rather than go to another team, he would retire. But I have a feeling that he thought that was a precursor to going to another team and doing what he didn't want to do, and decided to draw a line in the sand. And he was making a poor choice because it's really just a temporary thing. He's going to be on the Cubs starting September 1st, and likely would be part of the playoff roster when the playoffs start. But instead of just taking this as an opportunity, understanding the math of baseball rosters, he just bounced, pieced out. And I think there's a point when you make a really bad decision in your life. It's you either realize that decision and fix it, or you get more resolute and hold firm. And I really think that's what's happening right now. Is he's, rather than fess up to the mistake he made, he's just holding firm and making the issue worse. And someday he's going to look back at this and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that I acted like this or did this. But it's a tough situation because he's a really important guy to this roster, and they didn't want to lose both guys. They didn't have to. If they could keep both guys in Coughlin and LaStella, they wanted to. So it was really just in the month of August, when they've already got a huge lead and these games aren't as important right now, that they'd send him down and bring him back up for when they're really going to need him down the stretch. And I think, the guy's important to the team, and I don't know why he just can't see that and want to throw it all away. If you really care about your teammates and want to be with this organization, is you put your big boy pants on, you show up your assignment for another 2 weeks, you come back up, and Iowa's not that far from Chicago. You can come there on the weekends or when you have days off. So let me know what you guys are thinking about that. I'm really curious. You think he's just being a baby, or do you think he's right to not have to show up to that assignment? The next thing I wanted to talk about is, and this is, I had a couple people write in and suggest this to me, is what do I think will be the playoff rotation for the Cubs once the playoffs start? Right now, on paper, it's Arrieta's the number 1 starter, Lester's the number 2 starter, Lackey's the number 3 starter, Hamill is the number 4 starter, and Hendricks is the number 5 starter. And realistically, you could go with a 5-man rotation come the playoffs, but as you get down to it, is really you're going to ride heavily your top 2 to 3 guys, and minimally pitch your other guys, unless you just have an absolute stud rotation. So, and you want to put, and obviously when you're in the playoffs, is you want to put your best guys forward, because over a long major league season, 162 games, if your rotation gets screwed up a little bit, the idea is you want to put your best pitcher against somebody else's best pitcher to give you the best odds of winning. And when it comes to the playoffs, it's really important. So you want to get your best pitcher in there to give you the best chance of winning. And the earlier you get them in a series, the more times they're likely to pitch by the end of your term in the playoffs. So if you start them game 1 of the division series, if you go all the way, they might pitch twice. So they could, and then you got a couple days off between the next round. Try to reset your rotation, and the earlier they pitch, the more times they can pitch, and if it's your best pitcher, the more likely the chance you have to win. It's pretty easy as that. But when it comes to the Cubs, this is a little bit confusing, is because Jake Arrieta is not the Jake Arrieta that we saw the second half of last season, where he was just absolute dominance. You look at his numbers, and he's still pitching really well. It's just he's not this absolute Bob Gibson in his prime type shutdown guy. Lester has looked great for a lot of the season, but he's had his struggles recently. Lackey has been up and down, and he's had this problem all season long of giving up early runs, and that ends up costing him a little bit. And it's hard because he's not getting the run support that he should. And he's giving up early runs, so it's puts him in a little bit of a difficult situation. And he's such a fiery guy too. But I believe he actually, in his rookie year, pitched a Game 7 of the World Series, so he's got that experience. Hard to take that away. Hamill's been great, and Hendricks has been your most consistent pitcher all season long, and has been just great. So at what point do you want to switch this up, or do you want to put these guys in an order? And it seems that Joe Madden has no interest in, as well as Chris Bossia, the Cubs pitching coach. Neither one of them are interested in switching things up right now, but we've got, for the Cubs, 40, I wrote it down, sorry. 46 more games in the regular season. So you have 46 more games, roughly. You got a 5-man rotation, so you're looking at 9. Everyone getting 9 more starts. Seems legit. Over those 9 starts, you really get a handle on, all right, who's pitching well, who's not. Somebody a little sore, somebody a little banged up, does somebody need some rest? And then sort of at the end of the, maybe the Cardinals go on this huge run, the Cubs go on another slump, and this becomes a race, and you can't set the rotation up like you want to going to the playoffs. Sometimes things just work themselves out. This is a really long season. I know we've mentioned this before, but you can really just have the season work things out without you having to intervene or think about these. The NFL is a much different animal because you're playing 16 games. By the time you get a feel for the season, you could already be almost out of playoff contention. Baseball, you could go 2 months playing mediocre baseball and still jump right back into this and make it to the World Series. That's what a 162-game marathon season will do. Is you're not subjected to the ebbs and the flows of every day. You have to look for patterns. The NFL, you lose a guy for 2 weeks, and that could be the difference between playoffs and not. Baseball, you lose a guy for 2 weeks, you're like, luckily it was only 2 weeks. We still have 150 games left at that point. So, I mean, if it's me, I bucked the trend a little bit with Basio and Joe Madden. Even though they're much smarter guys than me as far as baseball, they're also a little more stubborn in their ways as well. And it's much easier for me to say because I'm just sitting here in a chair behind a microphone and I have no repercussions if I'm wrong. Those guys do. But if it's me, I'm going to throw Arrieta as my number 1. I'm throwing Lester as my number 2, and I'm putting Kyle Hendricks as 3. I know Lackey has the experience. I know this and I understand this, but he's also older. He's also all season long giving up early runs, and once the playoffs come, runs become a little bit harder to score. The games tighten up, and you don't want a guy who's going to be giving early runs up if you can help it. Hendricks is great. The one caveat he has is when he's given up a few runs in the games, it tends to be later in the games with leaving hanging pitches and their home runs. He's not giving up a lot of walks and base hits and big innings that way. He's leaving them over the plate for home runs, and it's what he did the other night against what game did he pitch? Oh, it was against the Cardinals. So, he pitched really well, but gave up some home runs. I had one more thing I wanted to talk about before we started jumping into the games from last week. I know we've talked about this several times before, both last season and this season. Theo Epstein has said that in order to make a serious postseason run, you need a 1 or greater WAR at every single position. So you have to be pretty evenly distributed with good players, and everybody has to be playing well. Sums it up. For those of you that listen that aren't huge baseball fans or don't know the advanced metrics, is what the WAR is it stands for wins against replacement. It basically says that the player that they have the number for, how many more wins is he worth as a player compared to the average player in this league. So if you have a negative WAR, that means you are below average player. And if you have a positive WAR, that means you are above average player. So everybody needs to be a 1 or higher in Theo's calculated head. So I did it earlier in the season. I definitely did it last year in the playoffs, but I just wanted to do it because I haven't done it in a while, is discuss the Cubs players and their WAR right now. And mind you, this was done Wednesday, I think. Wednesday or Thursday. So these numbers will be off by a tiny bit because of the last few games. But as of the other day, Anthony Rizzo at first base had a 4.1 WAR, which is really good. It's one of the top non-pitching WARs in baseball. Addison Russell at short, he's got a 2.5 WAR. And the cool thing about Addison Russell is he's only hitting in the 240s. He's not hitting well for average. But if you look, he's got the second most number of RBIs on the Cubs, and I believe he's top 10 in the National League is in RBIs. I can pull that up in a second. Look, but he's got quite a few RBIs. It means he's really hitting in the clutch situations, which is great. And he's got a 2.5 WAR. Zobrist at second has a 3.4 WAR. And then it gets a little murky because it's hard to adjust because you have Chris Bryant playing several positions. You've got a lot of rotational pieces because of the Schwarber injury. Baez has been like a super sub. So the way I did it was to get one person at every position. I put Bryant. I figured Bryant in as a left fielder and Baez as the third baseman. So Baez has a 2.0 WAR, which is very good as well, especially since he didn't play the whole season. Dexter Fowler in center at 3.1. Jason Hayward is a 1.6. Chris Bryant left field is a 5.7 WAR. I believe he might be tops in baseball for a non-pitcher, which he's on pace for an MVP type season. This is a really great season for Bryant. And then catcher was a weird one because David Ross catches a lot of games. Miguel Montero's caught a lot of games. I put Wilson Contreras because he's the guy that's going to be going forward, their main guy, because he's the best hitter of the three, and he's quickly becoming a very, very good fielding catcher. And he's got a 0.6 right now. But if you were to factor in the catching position as a whole, you have to be around 1. Miguel Montero's below 1 right now, but David Ross is well above a 1, and Contreras is a 0.6. So they're right around that mark. And I think if you that Contreras number is in only 43 games. So if you were to extrapolate that out to 162 game season, you're looking at well more than a 1 WAR. So I'm not really worried about that. And then on to the pitchers is Arrieta's got a 3.6, Lester a 2.2, Lackey 2.5, Hamill 1.3, and Hendricks 2.9. So realistically, you're over a 1 WAR at every position except catcher, and that's, if you extrapolate that out, you're definitely over a 1. So these Cubs realistically are, in Theo's methodical, mathematical universe, are on track for really good things this postseason. And I'm not going to say that ultimate goal because I'm nervous. I'm a Cubs fan, believe in curses and things like that. But this is, on paper, is a really good team. This is really good. Every position, there's no bottoming out in this roster. Everybody can hit on this team. Everybody can field. This is a very good, well put together team. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the games that they've played this week, and then I have a few more points that I wanted to talk about with the Cubs, and then we'll move on. So they had a 5-1 win against the Angels. Lackey had 8 innings pitched with only 1 earned run. Great start by Lackey, something you need to see from him. But again, he gave up that early run. It was a 5-1 game, and I believe the Cubs were down 1-0 at one point. So he needs to get into that groove, and once he gets in that groove, he seems to be going. But it's tough. It's tough to give up those early runs when you're considering playoffs. You had Wilson Contreras and Chris Bryant both homered in that game, and Lackey, once he gave up that early run, he ended up with 5 innings of the 80 pitched, were 3 up, 3 down. So it's a really great performance by Lackey. And then the next game was the Cubs beat Angels 3-1 in that 2-game series. The hitters for the Cubs really struggled against Ricky Nolasco, the pitcher for the Angels. They really struggled to get runs off of him, and that's been a problem for the Cubs all season. It's been like feast or famine. If you look at their record in games that they score 4 or more runs, and they're almost unbeatable. But if you look at their record overall, they're losing like a third of their games. So clearly, there's a lot of games where they're not scoring a lot of runs, and that's all solely on the hitters. You need to not get away from the things you do. Working the counts, making starting pitchers pitch a lot of innings or a lot of pitches and get out of there early, get on base, work the counts, choke up on the bat when you get 2 strikes, things like that is to really work those pitchers. But Jason Hamill pitched great in that game. 7 innings pitched, 4 hitter, no earned runs, 6 strikeouts to 2 walks. It was a great win all around for the Cubs. Able to pull one out in a game where they weren't getting hits. But the big in that game was on a infield hit. Pedro Strop tried to field the ball and did something funky to his knee. You were watching the game at first. You're like, all right, well, it looked like he just banged it. He's walking it off. Then he couldn't walk. And they had to go out there and help him off the field, and he wasn't putting any weight on the leg. And then after seeing the Schwarber issue, you're like, oh God, oh please no. Don't want to lose Pedro Strop. And it ended up he did hurt his knee, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But then the Cubs started a 4-game series with the Cardinals, their heated rivals. And at that point, before the season or the series started, the Cubs were up 12 on the Cards. First game was a doozy. Cubs won 4-3 in 11 innings. Rizzo had a bases loaded walk in the 11th to get the win. David Ross had a nice bunt single, and John Lester threw a 5-hitter with 2 earned runs. Struck out 6, only walked 1. Just a fantastic game. Showed just the heart the Cubs have, and they're going on to play tough and win these tight ball games, even when for the most part all statistics show that they've got this division locked up. But in this game, Mike Montgomery hit Matt Holliday and broke his hand. He's done for the season. I hate the Cardinals. I'm a diehard Cubs fan. I hate the Cardinals. And I hate seeing stuff like that. I hate it. I want to see a team win or a team lose, not because somebody got hurt, not because somebody got suspended, not because of any of these extraneous things. I want to see who the best teams are. I don't like these what ifs. Well, what if Kyle Schwarber wouldn't have got hurt? What if Matt Holliday wouldn't have got hurt? I hate these what ifs. I want to see the best players on the field playing their best, and winner take all, show who the actual best is. And it sucks to see a guy on your heated rival get hurt, and it's going to cost the Cardinals games and overall, because Matt Holliday is a good player. But I don't like seeing it, especially since the case that the Cardinals are a retaliatory type team. If you listen to their fans on the radio, they were calling for all types of headhunting. Bean Bryant, Bean Rizzo, Hurt Baez, Hurt Arrieta. They were calling for blood. Now, if this would have been a situation where the Cubs clearly were trying to hurt somebody, then it sucks, but you open that door already. But this clearly was a situation where you're trying in a tight game to get the win. He lost the pitch, hit the guy in the hand, and that sucks. It's an accident. You see pitchers pitch a wild game all the time, or a wild pitch all the time. These things happen. It sucks, and these are really amazing pitchers and what they can do with the control and pinpoint accuracy and such. But when you're throwing a baseball, is sometimes they get, you lose it, and to hit it, you're hitting this tiny little box from 60 feet away, and you lose it sometimes. And and it sucks that somebody got hurt, but to think that the Cardinals were going to come back and retaliate. And it's funny because I made these notes. Do the Cardinals retaliate? They've got 3 more games in this series, and then they have a September 12th, 13th, and 14th series in St. Louis, and then a September 23rd, 24th, and 25th series at Chicago. So you're like, all right, it's probably they're going to do a John Lackey type, I got a long memory, and hit somebody then. Nope, they didn't wait. Didn't wait at all. Is Wainwright hit in the very next game. Wainwright hit Chris Coughlin. Or Matt, I'm sorry, he hit Matt Caesar. And then Williams hit Coughlin. And those were clearly intentional hits. And I'm so glad that the Caesar hit led to the barn doors opening in that game. Because the Cubs went on to just dominate the Cards 13-2. Arrieta looked great. Pitched 5 2/3, 4 hits, 1 earned run, 6 strikeouts, and the 1 run was a solo home run. It was Piscotty hit his 16th of the year in the 5th inning off of Arrieta, and it was just a hanging pitch. Other than that, he had one inning where it was a little sketch, but he got out of it with a big strikeout, and Arrieta looked really good. And the Cubs hitters just came to life. You had Caesar had a double. Bryant had 2 doubles. Addison Russell had a double. Contreras hit a home run. Matt Caesar hit 2 home runs. Soler hit a home run. Javi Baez hit a home run. Everything was clicking right for the Cubs. Pitching was well. Hitting was well. But you did have a bad inning by Joe Smith, the new acquisition, goofy right-handed thrower for the Cubs. He had 1 inning pitch and gave up a home run in the 8th inning. But overall, the Cubs played really well, but it sucked to see the Cardinals go headhunting right off the bat. Hopefully, they've got it out of their system and it's over with. But I don't. Knowing the Cardinals, they're going to still come at the Cubs. Then Game 3 of the 4-game series this was a much tighter game than the score shows, but the Cardinals won 8-4. Hendricks pitched a great game, 7 innings, 5 hits, 2 earned runs, but he gave up 2 home runs, 1 in the 6th and 1 in the 7th, and they were both solo shots. And you're like, all right, this is the tightly contested game, and at that point it's 2-2 and going into the 8th inning. Then you send C.J. Edwards in, who's been really good for the Cubs. He throws 2/3 of an inning, gives up 5 earned runs, 4 walks, only 1 hit, and just opens the floodgates open. And then Joe Smith comes in and after that and gives up another run. So you give up 6 runs in that one frame, and you bust it wide open. I mean, the Cubs came back to score 2 in the bottom of the 9th, but you were at a 6-run deficit at that point in the bottom of the 9th. I mean, this is a really good team, but 6 runs in the bottom of the 9th is tough for any team to put up. I mean, can it be done? Oh, absolutely. But to expect it and to count on it in the clutch like that, that's tough. It's real tough. But it was another bullpen issue, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. And then finally we get to yesterday's game. This whole game, the Cubs just felt like they were in cruise control. Is going into the 8th inning, the Cubs were up. They were up 3-1, and it felt like, although it was only a 2-run lead, it just felt like the Cubs were in cruise control. You had John Lackey. He gave up. He had no earned runs. He gave up 1 run, but he had 5 strikeouts, 1 walk, 4 hits in 6 2/3. You're like, all right, this is a great start by Lackey. Justin Grimm comes in and finishes out the 6th with 1 strikeout in the last guy. or sorry, it was in the 7th. The 7th he did that. The 8th inning, Rondon comes in. You're like, all right, Ronnie has been great for the Cubs. Lights out, blah, blah, blah. This is the first game he's pitched in like 12 games because he's had that tricep issue. And he comes in and absolutely not just blows a save, blows it wide open. He pitches 1/3 of an inning. So he got one out in the inning. He gave up 4 hits, 4 earned runs, 2 home runs. Just absolutely blew it open. And then Travis Wood comes in and pitches the rest of the inning, the rest of the 8th. He gives up 2 hits, 1 earned run, a walk. And at that point, the Cubs are just stunned. They were up 3-1. And then it's suddenly 6-3. You're like, what the hell happened? I was flipping back and forth between the Olympics and that game, and I turned it on because I like to watch the lockdown innings, and I'm just watching it and going, what? I'm like, get Rondon out of there, and nope. Just he blows it wide open. It was a rough inning. And then Aroldis Chapman goes in the 9th and strikes out 2, gets the side out. But the Cubs did score 1. They came back from 6-3 to make it 6-4 to make it a little bit interesting. But it's, again, the Cubs hitters in the last 2 games really just went cold. I mean, they got Leak out fairly early in the 6th inning. They banged 3 runs off of him, but they just couldn't really get anything else going. So that goes to the point I've been alluding to, and I talked about it even before the show started in the opening. The Cubs rebuilt this bullpen. They started the season okay, had some real struggles with the bullpen. You add a Joe Smith, C.J. Edwards seems to come around. You add Mike Montgomery, and you add Aroldis Chapman. You're like, all right, this is a much rebuilt. You're setting yourself up so you have Strop coming in the 7th, Rondon in the 8th, Aroldis Chapman in the 9th. You had a lockdown closer in Rondon, and you move him to the 8th. Suddenly he's a lockdown setup guy, and it seems Strop's been very good. So it seems like if you got the lead after 6 innings, that you should lock this game up. But then earlier in the week, as Strop hurts his knee, he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. He already had successful surgery, so now it's the rehabbing of it. He's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, so you're not going to have him until late September, early October. So he might not even be around for the rest of the season until the playoffs. Rondon has all kinds of triceps issues, misses 12 games, and comes back and throws just garbage. And Chapman's looked great, but one man a bullpen does not make. And Rondon also has this Tommy John history that you worry about. So this bullpen has gone from being a meh to a liability to a strength back to a liability again. So it has just been up and down all season, and this is the thing that worries Cubs fans. So what else do I have for the Cubs? There's a couple more points. Is Wilson Contreras has been steadily moving into being an everyday catcher. And come the playoff time, I would find Joe Madden probably hard-pressed to not pitch him or to start him more. And part of that is going to be, when is he going to catch for Jake Arrieta? Jake Arrieta likes to work with Miguel Montero. And so that was the burning question. And then it came the game against the Cardinals on, Saturday? Yeah, Saturday's game, and Wilson Contreras comes in there. And that's really important because Contreras is much, much better hitter than Miguel Montero or David Ross. And come the playoffs, you're going to want a bat in the lineup, and that's going to be putting him at catcher. He's been astronomically getting better and better as the season goes on. His roughly 50 games in in the majors, and he's getting better and better as far as being a receiver and being on the same page as guys. But he never really had a chance to work with Arrieta, and he finally got that opportunity, and Arrieta had a really great game, and hopefully that goes a long way into everybody on this rotation feeling comfortable working with the guy, because you're gonna need that come the playoffs. You're gonna need his bat, you're gonna need his arm, and he's much better at this point in his career than Miguel Montero. Finally, the last thing I want to say is the magic number for the Cubs is down to 34 with 46 games left. If you take the Cubs' season winning percentage over 46 games, that means they'll win 29. So if they win 29 and their magic number is 34, there's no way these last 46 games the Cardinals are going to go 41 and they didn't need to go 42-4. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. So the Cubs are inching closer and closer to locking this up. But it's really frustrating as a Cubs fan is if they could have they win the first 2 games of this 4-game series and they've a bad inning that really costs. They might have lost game 3 anyway, but that one big inning was what careened that out of control where it was uncatchable game. But that 4th game, the Cubs had that one in the bag. And if they could just go back and put anybody in but Rondon in that, the Cubs should have locked it down, won 3 out of 4, and wound up being 14 games up instead of 12 on the Cardinals. And at that point, it would have been like a 32-game magic number, much more likable number than. But either way, the Cubs are just still steaming along. It just sucks to see them lose against a team that, if you're looking at the standings, the Cardinals with these 2 wins against the Cubs have vaulted themselves into the wild card spot right now. So if you're looking at the standings, Washington, the Cubs are the number 1 seed, and they'll play. If the playoffs were to start today, the Cubs have the number 1 seed, and they would be facing the winner of the 1-game wild card. And then San Francisco and Washington are the number 2 and number 3 seeds, so they would be playing each other. So Washington and the Giants would be playing each other. And then it would be the Dodgers versus St. Louis for the 1-game playoff to see who would play the Cubs. And I don't like either one of those teams. Like the Dodgers have been playing so good, and Clayton Kershaw is still not back on the active roster. And the Cardinals they're just a tough team. You throw out statistics from this team. The Cardinals have been decimated by injuries, but they're such a potent offense is you can never count them out of games. They have so much power up and down that lineup. Is at any point they can just open the scoring window and catch up to you. So it only takes, you could have a guy like Hendricks pitching a great game the whole way through, and then a Rondon comes in and pitches to a couple guys, and boom, lead erased, and they've taken the lead. So they're scary. It's all they need is a couple of good pitching performances in a row, and with that offense, it's not a best of 162. It's the best of a much smaller number. So I don't like those lineup matchups, either one of them, but that's where we're looking at right now. So if the season were to end today, the Cubs are going to be playing the 1-game winner between the Dodgers and the Cardinals. Miami is 4-6 in their last 10, and they've fallen out to just behind the Cardinals. See, looking at the wild card actual standings, I'll load this up. Dodgers are the number 1 wild card. St. Louis 2. Miami's a half game behind St. Louis, and they've lost Giancarlo Stanton. And there's talks that they might add A-Rod to try to add some pop to that bat or that lineup. Then you've got Pittsburgh a game and a half behind out of the wild card. The Mets 2.5, and then Colorado 6. Philadelphia 6.5. And then you start getting to the more ridiculous teams. Milwaukee 9, San Diego 11.5. Things that they won't happen. And yeah, just for completeness sake, is in the American League, if the playoffs were to start today, Toronto would be the number 1 seed, and they would be playing the winner of the 1-game wild card series between Baltimore and Boston. Now that one's interesting because all 3 of those are, it's kind of like what happened with the Cubs last year, is Cardinals, Cubs, and Pittsburgh, all 3 from the same division, and all 3 were just really good teams, and one of them got eliminated right off the bat in Pittsburgh, and then it was another one who was going to be eliminated in the first round. And they've all played so many times throughout the season. So Baltimore, Boston would play 1 game, winner would go on to play Toronto, and then Cleveland would play Texas. Another really interesting series. So that American League series is really shaping up to be something awesome. Now moving on to Bulls really quickly. Don't have a lot to say. I was actually had no plans to talk about this at all. But my buddy Gary, and if you are a longtime listener to the show, you know Gary was a regular contributor, talks about White Sox and Bulls. He's a season ticket holder for both. Huge fan. Longtime fan. But then he sort of dropped off the show because he's got 2 kids and a house, and he plays in a baseball league and is in a band, so he has no time for that. But anyway, he texted me and was like, "What do you?" Actually, let me just read the text. Yo, so you think the Bulls will get Boogie? And then I texted him. I was like, "What are you talking about?" And we go back and forth because I thought this was long dead, but apparently, after the free agency frenzy has died down, the summer league is come and gone. We're in a really quiet point for the NBA league season. It's just typical without this time of year because we're in the calm before the storm when the season starts. But suddenly, a few trade rumblings start making their way around, and the biggest one is probably Bulls trading for DeMarcus Cousins. It seems like the Sacramento Kings have renewed interest in listening to trade offers for DeMarcus Cousins, and insiders are saying that the former All-Star is going to be traded sooner rather than later. And one report I'm seeing says that the rumor mill is swirling around that Boogie Cousins is going to join his former teammate and his best friend Rajon Rondo on the Bulls. Is this a stretch? Is this reality? Then DeMarcus Cousins gets quoted in an interview saying, "I love Rajon Rondo and Jimmy Butler is my boy, and they got Dwayne Wade. Chicago is a great city, and they got a squad." That's an interesting comment they make. So if you're Sacramento, you sort of want to get rid of DeMarcus Cousins. This has been contentious for a while now between the two of you. He's a great player. He could make the Bulls better. And the Bulls have a lot of youth on their team that they could trade. Between Bobby Portis, Doug McDermott, Nico Mirotic, and Denzel Valentine, the guy they just drafted, the Bulls front office should have more than enough options to entice Sacramento to make this trade. And DeMarcus Cousins has already expressed his interest in joining the team. Last season, DeMarcus Cousins averaged just shy of 27 points and 11.5 rebounds per game. That's big-time production, and especially since this is a really wide-open Eastern Conference, is if you're the Bulls and you can add a legitimate guy along with somebody with multiple NBA titles in Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo, who was a great player last year, you have that chemistry with the two. You get rid of a team headache in Derrick Rose. Who knows what happens? It just takes one injury to LeBron to make this wide open. Who knows? I mean, it's all a lot of what ifs and conjecture right now, but it's an interesting philosophy, and I would love to see DeMarcus Cousins on this team. If for nothing else, it's going to be interesting. So stay tuned, and we'll have more on this next week, hopefully. But that's all I really want to have about the Bulls. Other than that, it was just been really quiet. But what I wanted to do was wrap this up with Chicago Bears. We've talked a lot all season, or all off season, between getting ready for the NFL draft, the analyzing, the training camp, blah, 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 free agency. And we're all excited. We're all ready for NFL season to be back. And Thursday night, the Bears had their first preseason game to show off this rebuilt defense and this new look offense. And everybody's saying, well, under team 2 or year 2 of John Fox, his teams get better, blah, 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 astronomical improvement. And they go on to face the reigning champions in Denver Broncos and get whitewashed 22-0. Now, I'm going to put an asterisk here. I didn't watch the game live. My wife had a party for a film she just finished, so I accompanied my lovely wife to the party, and then I came home and watched it over the weekend on DVR. So hearing everybody talk about it for a couple of days and seeing some low-light highlights on the news and hearing the sky is falling, I'm like, oh man, this is bad. Like this is ugly. The Bears look terrible. But I sat down and watched the game, and sure, it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. But there were things that I liked. There were things I didn't like, and that score was, well, whatever, because it wasn't a blowout. It was just a steady stream of the Bears making mistakes and not capitalizing on Denver Bronco mistakes. So I want to be a little more positive than this, and I want to give them positivity before I give negativity. Is positives. First of all, this is the preseason. There is no correlation between the preseason and the regular season. You've had teams that have gone 0-4 in the preseason and go on to play in the playoffs and in Super Bowls. And you've had teams that go 4-0 in the preseason and they end up being, drafting in the top 10. So it really doesn't mean anything. It's taking a look at what you see on the film. And positive number 2, there were no major injuries. Kadeem Carey has a concussion, and you've got some few dings and things like that, but no major injuries. So that's a positive. You got a catch from Alshon Jeffrey and Kevin White in the same game. Positive. You had your rebuilt defensive line was able to get a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks. Positive. So, and if you watched, is Mariani looked nice, Braverman looked nice, and when they had protection, is the quarterbacks looked good too. All three of them. Is Fales looked good, Brian Hoyer looked pretty good, other than the one interception, and Jay Cutler looked all right. So there was positives to be taken away from this, but then there was negatives, and the overarching negative for me was that offensive line. That offensive line set the tone for the whole game, both sides of the ball, and it was not a good one. I saw the sack numbers. I think it was 7 sacks, and I read about that before I saw the game, and I assumed it would be much worse than it was. But I sat down and watched, and it seemed like it was a lot of miscommunication. It didn't seem like there was a ton of people just getting blown off the line of scrimmage. I mean, that did happen in certain points of the game, but when you watched, it was a lot of just miscommunication. It was somebody... there was one where there was a late blitz from the secondary, and the running back would have been the one who picked it up, but the running back went in to help on another block, because it was such a late blitz. And at that point, the quarterback's got to see that coming and throw it away and help out his line. And the running back's got to be watching for that as well, because he needs to peel off and at least put a hat on the guy to slow him down. There was other ones where there was miscommunication of who was going to take who on a stunt. It was a lot of miscommunications that led to pressure, and that needs to be cleaned up. And part of that is going to be gelling together and playing together. You just lost Hroniss Grasu. You moved Ted Larson into a position he's never played. If you realistically look at this roster, you've got one guy who's an actual center, and he's never played an NFL game. And you have Ted Larson starting at center, and you move Cody Whitehair over to try his hand at center to see what you have, because you've lost Grasu for the season. So it was a lot of miscommunication, and that takes time. Part of that is the running game. I give the running backs an incomplete because you can't really judge them. They were just getting hit as soon as they get the ball. The only one who looked halfway decent was Jaquiz Rogers, and he's running for his roster life. So the running backs incomplete. The offensive line didn't look very good at all. Wide receivers, it was hard to judge, again, the incomplete, because there was so much pressure that it really put the Bears in a predicament where they were third and longs and they were going 3 and out because they're just pinning their ears back and going after them. Hard to give a good grade on the quarterbacks as well. So it was all predicated on the offense is poor offensive line play. And it's part of what I said is that this Bears team, their Achilles heel is this offensive line. They were going in there banking on / finger crossing of please nobody on this line get hurt. Because if we can have the solid starting 5 all season long, then we might be okay. But you've had a couple of guys retire that you signed. Your expected starter at center, Hroniss Grasu, gets hurt, tears a knee, and he's out for the season. A guy that you were expecting to be competing for a backup spot is suddenly thrust into the starting role. You've got a rookie starting in at one guard. You've got a new tackle and a right tackle and a new left tackle who's playing over his head last year, and you don't know what you're going to get from him this year. So it's a lot of flux, and you don't have a lot of depth at that position or in that unit. There's not a lot of offensive line depth. There's a lot of players, but not a lot of guys who can play, if you know what I'm talking the difference. And that's going to be the downfall of the Bears if they have an awful season. It's going to be the offensive line just didn't do their job. And when an offensive line is playing really well, it makes the whole offense look so much better, because any quarterback can pick apart a defense if you give him time. And no quarterback looks good if they have no time in the NFL. And so the Bears are setting Jay up if this offensive line doesn't gel quickly. He's going to catch the brunt of, but Jay sucks, Jay's awful, when the poor guy's going to be running for his life again. And this is something that I got to hold Ryan Pace's feet to the fire on, is because he cut loose Matt Slauson, and I'm hearing things about how he was tipping plays with how he positioned himself and such, probably leaning on his heels or leaning forward on the balls of his feet or leaning back on the heels of, whether it's a run or a pass. But he could still play at a level that's much better than the backups that the Bears have. So it's just silly that, I'm going back on, I get why you had to replace him as a starter, but be selfish. Don't send him off to try to start somewhere else. Put him on your bench. Let him earn that time. There's going to be injuries on the offensive line. Let him earn it, step in there and play. What else? The question is now for the Bears is when is it time to worry about Pernell McPhee's knee? Is it now? Is it once the season starts? it's you're seeing nothing from him, and I know that at the end of the last season that Willie Young and Lamar Houston were your best edge rushers, and they're both here again. And you've added Leonard Floyd, who actually played pretty decently in this game, limited but pretty decent. But Pernell McPhee was the heart and soul of your defense last year, and if you can have him come in and play at a high level, your defense is going to clearly be much better than it was, or than it would be without him. I had somebody say last year, because the Bears did a joint practice prior to their game with the Indianapolis Colts. And John Fox and the coaching staff talked about how well they practiced against the Colts and how it was encouraging, blah, blah, blah. And I had a lot of people citing that to me, saying, well, who cares what they say about how they line up in practice, because they said that they lined up well in practice with the Colts and et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, look how the Colts played last year. The Colts were not a good team last year. The year before, yes. Last year, no. So if you're setting your mark as a team that's not very playing against a team that's not very good and competing, then of course you don't have your mark set very high, and it's easy to hit that mark. But this year, the Cubs, why do I keep saying the Cubs? The Bears are doing the same joint practice, except they're doing it with the New England Patriots prior to Thursday's game against them. Now that is a much higher bar that's set. It is over the past 15 years, this has been the cream of the crop team in the league. So if you're able to compete with them, that shows you something. And if not, you're at least seeing where in practice, without being game situations, is where you're getting pantsed, where you're holding your own, where you need to improve, where you're okay at. And that's part of it. So hopefully the Bears can go in and learn a few things about who they are as a team and where they're going. I had a few more notes about the game, and I'm trying to remember doing these from memory because when I watched the game, I didn't take notes. I typically take notes, but I had my 2-year-old sleeping across my lap, and my notebook and pen were pinned underneath her, and I didn't want to wake her up because she's been sick. So I didn't want to wake her up, and so I just tried to take mental notes. We talked about the offense. It was hard to grade anything on the offense just because the offensive line was so bad. So you couldn't really grade Dowell Loggins as a pass play caller, or the wide receivers, or the running backs, or the quarterbacks, or the tight ends. It was really just the offensive line got an F, and go from there. But defense, when they had the starters in, and mind you, is the defensive line from, you're like, all right, well, the Broncos had the best pass rushing defense in the league last year, so you can't really judge the offensive line. The two best pass rushers for the Denver Broncos didn't play. Von Miller didn't play, and DeMarcus Ware didn't play. So that adds how bad it was, is those two guys didn't play. But on defense, the Bears rebuilt front seven, played really well. The defensive line got a lot of pressure on the offensive line of the Broncos and on the quarterback. But where things fell apart was you had some gap containment issues, especially Mitch on Ryan. He had a bunch of blown gaps where there was some. They weren't long runs, but they were decent chunk runs that somebody else had to wrap up, and they were back cutting to where he overran, didn't have his containment. So there's room to improve still there, but overall they looked pretty decent. You saw Leonard Floyd, the Bears' first-round pick. He came in and played okay and drew a couple penalties, and you saw the speed out there. Linebackers looked okay. But the secondary was meh. Bryce Callahan got picked on pretty good, and he was the one that gave up the big 37-yard touchdown pass. And I watched that play, and I was trying to see, I'm going to backpedal for a second, is when you watch a game, sometimes it's hard to pick out who was at fault for a blown play because you don't know what was the coverage was called. Same thing with when there's an interception, and it's sometimes hard to blame the quarterback if he throws to a spot and the wide receiver is not there. Sometimes the wide receiver ran the wrong route. And on these timing routes, a quarterback is going to throw. He's going to throw to where the wide receiver, a lot of times you're not throwing to a guy per se. You're throwing to a spot where the guy is going to be. And if the guy runs the wrong route or his timing gets screwed up, it looks really bad on the quarterback when it's out of the quarterback's control. He's doing it what he's supposed to do. But same thing with on the defense is if you're a cornerback and you drop coverage off your guy because the safety's supposed to come down and cover him once he goes beyond a certain yard line. And if the cornerback or the safety doesn't come over, it looks like the cornerback absolutely blew it, when really he's the one that was doing correctly based on the defensive scheme and the defensive play call, and it was the safety that was bad. So I watched this over and over, and there's no way, based on all the positioning, that I can see that being anybody but Bryce Callahan blowing the play. And it looked like he was anticipating an under route, and Demarcus Thomas just continued on in the go route and was wide open in the end zone. Bryce Callahan looked bad, and they picked on him a little bit from there. You saw a lot of the young kids playing defensive back, and some of them had their up moments, some of them had their down moments. Houston Carter had a complete whiff Olay on a punt, and it led to the punt block. That's something that's going to be extremely cleaned up on, or he won't play in special teams in those situations. But you saw a lot of missed tackles in the young secondary. You saw a lot of defensive plays where they were out of position, and those are all things that get cleaned up as the preseason and training camp and practices before the season go on. Those are the types of things you learn from. Is you watch the game film, you see where you did wrong, you learn for next time, etc., etc. These are the things. I'm not a skies falling guy right now. This game opened my eyes that the Bears have a lot more holes in the team than I thought they did. But I'm not going to give my final prediction on wins until I see a couple more preseason games. I want to see at least 2 more games before I can give an honest assessment. But there's a lot more holes than I thought there were, and less answers for those holes than I thought there were. But on the other hand is when you're playing a new defense for these young kids, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to learn from it. I'm less worried about the defense than I am about that offensive line. And that offensive line is going to need time to gel. So they're going to have to set, this week they're probably going to have to set who their starting 5 are and go with it, whether right or wrong, because they want to get them time together. Because once the end of the season rolls around, you're going to be in a better spot by having 5 guys. Maybe there's a better option at 1 or 2 of the positions on your team, but you're better off with all 5 guys playing consistently together for 16 games than you are switching somebody in and out or swapping positions. So we're going to see hopefully a lot of these questions answered this week against New England, or at least the Bears coaching staff be able to make some really honest assessments playing against the New England and go, hey, listen, we thought we were here, but we're really here. And try to do some corrections prior to that first game against the Houston Texans. Because this is a big season for John Fox and for Ryan Pace and for the Bears organization. Is they can't keep being this mediocre team. It's cost too many coaches, too many GMs their jobs. Somebody has to step up and do the things you need to do to win. Hopefully that's this regime right now. So that's going to do it for this episode of Swerski Sports. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please make sure you're subscribing however you listen, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes. Share it with your friends, subscribe, leave comments. If you guys have questions, you know how to get in touch with us. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully next week when we talk, we're talking about a big win over a New England team. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan.
She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears!
Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.